An arrogant UFC champion calls out Steven Seagal at a children's charity event, shoving the 71-year-old martial artist and demanding a fight in front of terrified kids. The heavyweight bully towers over the quiet man in the black suit, screaming, "I'll knock you out, Grandpa," as cameras capture every brutal moment. But this old man, the champion just humiliated, isn't some washed-up movie star. This is Steven Seagal, the aikido master who's been breaking bones and shattering egos for 5 decades. The arrogant fighter has no clue he just challenged a legend who can end careers with a single move. A man who's taken down real killers while this punk was still in diapers. As the champion flexes for the cameras, the aikido master accepts the challenge with deadly calm, his dark eyes promising a lesson in respect the young fighter will never forget. The bully's crew films everything, thinking they're about to witness an easy beatdown of some Hollywood has been, but they're actually recording the moment their hero's world comes crashing down. What happens when pure arrogance meets ancient wisdom? Will the champion survive, discovering why some masters never lose their edge? What happened next would shatter the bully's ego for the rest of his pathetic career. Before we jump back and tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom sparkled under crystal chandeliers as 300 of Los Angeles' elite mingled at the annual Champions for Children charity gala. Champagne flutes clinked against the backdrop of gentle classical music, while children from St. Mary's Hospital watched wide-eyed from their special section, their small faces glowing with excitement at being surrounded by so many famous faces. Patricia Wellman, the event coordinator, checked her watch nervously. The evening's special guest was running late, and the silent auction was winding down. She adjusted the microphone at the podium, scanning the crowd of celebrities, athletes, and wealthy donors who had gathered to support the children's hospital. The ballroom doors burst open with a force that made several guests jump. Rick Maddox stumbled through the entrance, his massive 6 feet, 4 inches frame filling the doorway. The UFC heavyweight champion's expensive black suit couldn't hide the fact that he'd been drinking heavily. His buzz-cut hair was disheveled, and his piercing blue eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. "Sorry I'm late," Maddox bellowed, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Traffic was murder, you know how it is. Conversations died as heads turned toward the champion. Parents instinctively moved closer to their children as Maddox weaved through the crowd, knocking into a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. The silver platter crashed to the marble floor with a resounding clang. "Oops," Maddox laughed, not bothering to help clean up the mess. "My bad, buddy." He continued his unsteady path toward the bar, passing a display of artwork created by the hospital's young patients. Watercolor paintings and crayon drawings hung on easels, each one signed with a child's hopeful signature. Maddox barely glanced at them as he brushed past, his elbow catching one of the easels. The display toppled over, sending a dozen precious artworks scattering across the floor. Paint smeared on his sleeve as he looked down at the ruined drawings. With casual indifference. "Kid stuff," he muttered, stepping over a painting of a rainbow without a second thought. From across the room, a distinguished older man in a perfectly tailored black suit observed the scene with calm, alert eyes. His silver-black hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and despite being in his 70s, he moved with fluid grace as he approached the scattered artwork. Without saying a word, he knelt down and began carefully collecting the damaged pieces. His weathered hands, marked with the calluses of decades of martial arts training, handled each drawing as if it were a precious artifact. A small girl with a hospital bracelet on her wrist ran over to help him. "That's my picture of my puppy," she said sadly, pointing to a torn piece of paper. "It's beautiful," the man replied in a soft, authoritative voice. "We can fix this. Sometimes, the most beautiful things are the ones that have been broken and put back together." Security guards hovered nearby, uncertain whether to approach the famous fighter. Maddox had reached the bar now and was loudly ordering a double whiskey, regaling anyone within earshot with crude jokes about the boring charity crap and boasting about his upcoming title defense. "These hospital kids need to toughen up anyway," he announced to no one in particular. "Life's gonna hit them harder than any disease ever could." The man in the black suit continued organizing the artwork, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly at Maddox's words. Several other guests began helping him, drawn by his quiet dignity in the face of such disrespect. Patricia Wellman approached the microphone again, her voice shaking slightly as she tried to restore order to the evening. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please. It's time for tonight's special presentation. The distinguished man in the black suit stood gracefully, his movements flowing like water as he set the last of the rescued artwork safely aside. He removed his jacket with deliberate care, revealing a crisp white dress shirt that somehow suggested he was prepared for more than just dinner conversation. Children began gathering around as he stepped onto the small stage that had been set up in the center of the ballroom. His presence commanded attention without demanding it, a natural authority that made even the adults stop their conversations and turn toward him. "Good evening, young warriors," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room without seeming to raise it. "Tonight, I want to show you something very special. Something about finding strength not through anger or violence, but through understanding." He began with slow, meditative movements, his body flowing through forms that seemed to defy his age. Each gesture was precise and purposeful, like a master calligrapher painting invisible words in the air. The children watched in fascination. As he demonstrated basic aikido principles, his explanations simple yet profound. "In aikido, we don't meet force with force," he explained, gently guiding a young boy through a basic movement. "When someone pushes you, you don't push back. You move with their energy and redirect it, like water flowing around a stone." A little girl with pigtails raised her hand. "What if someone's really mean to you?" The man smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "Then you show them a different way. You don't become mean back. You stay centered, stay calm, and you use their meanness against them, not to hurt them, but to teach them." He demonstrated with another volunteer, showing how a smaller person could redirect the force of a larger attacker without causing harm. His movements were hypnotic, economical yet beautiful, powerful yet peaceful. Even the adults found themselves leaning in, captivated by the demonstration. From the bar, Maddox's voice cut through the respectful silence. "What is this, some kind of dance class?" He took another swig of whiskey, his words slurring slightly. "This is supposed to be a charity gala, not a senior citizen aerobics session." The man on stage didn't acknowledge the interruption, instead focusing entirely on the children. He continued his demonstration, showing them how to escape from a wrist grab, how to maintain balance when pushed, how to find their center even when the world around them was chaotic. "Remember," he told them, "true strength isn't about how hard you can hit. It's about how you help others, how you protect the innocent, and how you stay true to yourself even when others try to bring you down." The audience was completely absorbed. Now, even the skeptical adults recognizing they were witnessing something special. This wasn't just a martial arts demonstration. It was a philosophy lesson wrapped in movement, a masterclass in dignity and self-control. As the demonstration wound down, the children applauded enthusiastically. Several parents wiped away tears, moved by the simple wisdom they'd just witnessed. The man bowed deeply to his young audience, his respect for them genuine and complete. Patricia Wellman stepped forward, her voice filled with admiration and gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, please join me in thanking our special guest this evening. A true legend of martial arts and cinema, a man who has inspired generations with his dedication to justice and his mastery of the ancient art of aikido." She paused for dramatic effect, her smile broad and proud. "Please welcome the one and only Steven Seagal." The applause was thunderous, washing over the ballroom like a wave. Adults who had grown up watching his films cheered with genuine enthusiasm, while the children clapped excitedly for their new teacher. Even the hotel staff had stopped their work to watch and applaud. But from the bar came a different sound entirely, the sharp crack of a glass being slammed down too hard on marble, followed by slow, mocking applause that cut through the celebration. Like a blade, Steven Seagal bowed gracefully to the enthusiastic crowd, his calm demeanor unchanged by the thunderous applause. He began answering questions from the children, his voice patient and kind as he explained the deeper meanings behind the movements they'd just witnessed. "Mr. Seagal," asked a boy with a leg brace, "can Aikido really help someone like me?" "Aikido," is not about your body, young man. Seagal replied, kneeling to the boy's eye level. It's about your spirit, your mind, your heart. The strongest warriors are often those who have faced the greatest challenges. The intimate moment was shattered by heavy footsteps and the overwhelming smell of whiskey. Brick Maddox had left the bar and was now climbing onto the stage, his massive frame swaying slightly as he grabbed the microphone. Hold on, Maddox slurred, his voice booming through the sound system. This is what passes for fighting these days. Movie magic and dance moves. A collective gasp rose from the audience. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer as the atmosphere in the room shifted from celebration to something darker and more dangerous. Seagal remained perfectly still, his posture relaxed but alert. You want to teach these kids about real fighting? Maddox continued, his voice getting louder and more aggressive. Let me show them what actual combat looks like, not this Tai Chi bullshit. Please, Mr. Maddox. Patricia Wellman tried to intervene. This is a children's event. Shut up, lady, Maddox snapped, then turned his bloodshot gaze to Seagal. You, old man, you really think this fake martial arts crap works against real fighting? Against a real athlete? Seagal's voice remained calm and controlled. I think these children have seen enough conflict for one evening. Perhaps you should, perhaps I should what? Maddox stepped closer, using his height advantage to loom over the aikido master. Perhaps I should let you keep filling their heads with fantasy? These kids live in the real world, Grandpa. They need to know what real strength looks like. The champion began shadowboxing, his movements crude but undeniably powerful. His fists cut through the air with vicious speed, each punch generating enough force to break bones. The children cowered as he demonstrated his arsenal of strikes, his face twisted with alcohol-fueled aggression. This is real fighting, he snarled. Not your movie magic. Not your pretty little dances. This is what wins championships. This is what puts food on the table and pays for fancy suits. Young man, Seagal said quietly, you're frightening the children. Good, Maddox roared. They should be frightened. The world is a scary place, and your make-believe martial arts won't save them from people like me. Security guards had started moving closer, but they hesitated. Maddox was too famous, too valuable to simply tackle and remove. The legal complications alone would be staggering. Tell you what, Steven Seagal, Maddox said, pronouncing the name with mocking emphasis. Why don't you show these kids how your aikido works against a real fighter? Come on, tough guy. Show them what happens when fantasy meets reality. The crowd held its breath. Every phone in the room was now recording, capturing every word of the confrontation. Seagal remained motionless, his dark eyes studying the younger man with the patience of someone who had seen this type of behavior many times before. I won't fight you here, Seagal said simply. Not in front of the children. Of course you won't, Maddox laughed harshly. Because you know what would happen. You know I'd expose your whole act for the joke it is. Without warning, Maddox shoved Seagal hard in the chest with both hands, putting his full weight behind the push. The older man stepped back smoothly, maintaining perfect balance despite the force of the attack. His expression never changed, but something flickered in his eyes, a flash of the warrior that still lived beneath the wise teacher. Come on, Grandpa, Maddox shouted, his face red with alcohol and rage. I'll knock you out right here, right now. Show these kids what happens to has-been movie stars who think they can actually fight. The children were crying now, some hiding behind their parents' legs. The beautiful evening had become a nightmare, and everyone in the room could feel the violence crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Security finally moved in, 3 large men in black suits surrounding Maddox. But even as they escorted him toward the exit, he continued shouting over his shoulder. You're a fraud, Seagal. A washed-up old man living off ancient glory. I challenge you to a real fight. Let's see how tough you really are. The morning sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Brick Maddox's Hollywood Hills mansion, couldn't dispel the fog in his head. He groaned as consciousness returned, bringing with it the familiar companions of a serious hangover. Pounding headache, cotton mouth, and the creeping dread that he'd done something spectacularly stupid the night before. His phone buzzed incessantly. On the nightstand, the sound like an ice pick through his skull. Danny Kowalski's name flashed on the screen for the dozenth time. Maddox grabbed the device and immediately wished he hadn't. The video had 2.3 million views and climbing. There he was, drunk and belligerent, shoving a 71-year-old man in front of terrified children. The comments section was a wasteland of criticism, but instead of shame, Maddox felt something else entirely: opportunity. "This is perfect," he muttered, his hangover suddenly forgotten. He scrolled through the endless stream of outrage and mockery, his mind already working the angles. "This is exactly what I needed." His phone rang again. Danny's panicked voice erupted from the speaker before Maddox could even say hello. "Brick, what the hell were you thinking? Do you have any idea what you've done? The sponsors are calling. The UFC is furious. And, calm down, Danny," Maddox interrupted, pulling himself out of bed and walking to his home gym. "This is the best thing that could have happened to us." "Best thing? Brick, you assaulted a senior citizen at a children's charity. On camera. This is career suicide." Maddox began setting up his phone to record, checking the lighting and angle. "No, Danny, this is career gold. Think about it. When's the last time anyone cared about Steven Seagal? When's the last time he was relevant? I just made him relevant again, and I'm going to ride that wave all the way to the biggest payday of my career." Within an hour, Maddox had posted his response video, standing in his state-of-the-art gym, surrounded by championship belts and training equipment. He looked directly into the camera with the confidence of a man who truly believed he was invincible. "Steven Seagal," he began, his voice steady and challenging. "You had your chance to back up your talk last night, and you ran. You made excuses. You hid behind children instead of proving your aikido actually works." He began hitting the heavy bag behind him, each punch landing with explosive force that sent shockwaves through the 200-pound bag. "I'm calling you out, old man. Right here, right now. You want to teach people about martial arts? Then prove your stuff works against real fighting. Prove it works against someone who can actually hurt you." The bag swayed violently under his assault, the chain creaking ominously with each devastating blow. "I'll give you $1 million if you can last one round with me. Hell, I'll give you $2 million if you can last 30 seconds without getting knocked out cold. But when you lose, and you will lose, you admit that your movie martial arts are nothing but Hollywood fantasy." Sports networks picked up the story within hours. ESPN ran it as breaking news. Social media exploded with debates about the challenge. Former UFC champions weighed in with their opinions. Boxing legends offered commentary. The story had everything: a legendary action star, a current champion, a massive age gap, and the kind of trash talk that made for irresistible television. By evening, Maddox's challenge video had over 5 million views. 3 major networks had reached out about broadcasting rights. His agent was fielding calls from streaming services and pay-per-view companies. Danny Kowalski, despite his initial panic, was starting to see dollar signs. "Okay," Danny admitted, during their emergency meeting, "maybe this isn't complete career suicide. But Brick, you're talking about fighting a 71-year-old man. Even if you win, you look like a bully. And if you lose, I'm not going to lose," Maddox said with absolute certainty. "Have you seen him lately? He's old, Danny. Whatever he had 30 years ago in the movies, it's gone now. This is going to be the easiest money I've ever made." The media frenzy continued to build throughout the day. Sports analysts debated the matchup with the kind of intensity usually reserved for championship fights. Vegas bookmakers were already setting odds, heavily favoring Maddox, naturally. But in a quiet dojo in the Hollywood Hills, Steven Seagal sat in meditation, surrounded by the tools and memories of a lifetime dedicated to martial arts. Awards lined the walls alongside photographs from his law enforcement career and film work. His katana collection gleamed in their display cases, each blade a reminder of the discipline and dedication that had defined his life. Detective Ray Castellano found him there as the sun set over Los Angeles, the city lights beginning to twinkle in the distance. The 58-year-old cop moved with the slight limp that came from 3 decades of chasing criminals through the streets of L.A. "Steven," Castellano said, settling into a chair across from his old friend, "please tell me you're not seriously considering this punk's challenge." Seagal's eyes remained closed, his breathing deep and controlled. The young man has made his position clear. He believes aikido is ineffective. He believes wisdom is weakness. He believes age has made me irrelevant. So, let him believe it. You've got nothing to prove to some drunk idiot with anger management issues. For the first time, Seagal opened his eyes. They were dark and calm, but Castellano could see something stirring beneath the surface, something that reminded him why his friend had been so effective in both law enforcement and on-screen combat. Perhaps, Seagal said quietly, it's time. Someone taught him about respect. 3 days of relentless media pressure followed Maddox's challenge video. Sports talk shows dissected every aspect of the potential matchup with the fervor usually reserved for championship bouts. Former MMA fighters, boxing legends, and martial arts experts all weighed in with their predictions, and the consensus was unanimous. Steven Seagal had no chance. Look, I respect what Seagal did for action movies, said former UFC heavyweight champion Marcus Williams on ESPN. But this isn't Hollywood. This is real combat against a prime athlete who hits like a freight train. Age is undefeated, and Father Time catches everyone eventually. The betting odds reflected the experts' opinions. Las Vegas bookmakers installed Maddox as a 20-1 favorite, with some sports books refusing to take action on the fight at all. It's not even a contest, declared renowned trainer Miguel Santos. This is like watching a Formula One car race against a horse and buggy. Throughout the media storm, Seagal remained silent. His representatives declined all interview requests, and his social media accounts stayed dormant. The silence only intensified the speculation about whether the aging action star would actually follow through with accepting such an impossible challenge. Meanwhile, Maddox basked in the attention like a man possessed. He appeared on 3 major sports shows in 2 days, each appearance more outrageous than the last. On First Take, he demonstrated his knockout power on a wooden board, splitting it cleanly in half with a single punch. That's what's going to happen to Seagal's head, he boasted to the cameras. I'm going to put that old man in the hospital where he belongs. These movie stars think they can actually fight, but they're about to learn the difference between choreography and reality. His training sessions at Wild Card Boxing Gym became public spectacles. Hundreds of fans gathered daily to watch him demolish heavy bags and spar with professional fighters. His power was undeniable. Each punch carried enough force to drop a bull, and his conditioning was that of a man in his absolute prime. 30 years ago, maybe Seagal had something, Maddox told a TMZ reporter while barely breathing hard after a brutal training session. But I've seen his recent movies. The guy can barely move without a stunt double. This is going to be a massacre. Then, on Thursday evening, as the sports world debated whether the fight would actually happen, Steven Seagal broke his silence with a single social media post that sent shockwaves through the internet. Young man, you have much to learn about. Respect. I accept your challenge. Name the time and place. The response was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, the post had thousands of shares and comments. Sports networks interrupted their regular programming to announce the breaking news. Social media platforms crashed from the surge in traffic as fight fans around the world reacted to the stunning development. Vincent Torino, a thin man with slicked back hair and expensive suits that screamed newly acquired wealth, called within the hour. His underground fighting promotion had been gaining notoriety for hosting the kind of no-holds-barred competitions that mainstream organizations wouldn't touch. I can offer both fighters $1 million each, Torino said during the hastily arranged conference call. My warehouse venue can accommodate 400 spectators, and I guarantee complete discretion. No athletic commissions, no drug testing, no rules except what you two agree on. The fight was set for Saturday night, just 4 days away, Friday. Evening descended over Los Angeles like a heavy curtain, bringing with it the weight of anticipation that had been building throughout the week. In dojos and gyms across the city, martial artists and fighters debated the upcoming confrontation with the passion of religious scholars arguing doctrine. At his private dojo nestled in the Hollywood Hills, Steven Seagal moved through his evening routine with the same methodical precision that had defined his practice for 5 decades. The space was a shrine to martial arts tradition. Ancient weapons lined the walls, calligraphy scrolls bore the wisdom of masters long dead, and the polished wooden floors had absorbed the sweat and dedication of countless training sessions. Seagal's movements flowed like water as he performed kata, the traditional forms that contain the essential principles of aikido. Each technique was executed with perfect precision, but close observation revealed subtle changes from his prime years. His steps were marginally shorter, his pivots slightly less explosive, his recovery a fraction slower. Time, the undefeated champion, had claimed its due even from a master. Yet there was something in his demeanor that transcended physical limitations, a centeredness that came from decades of facing real violence, a calm that could only be earned through genuine combat. Experience. This wasn't the manufactured confidence of a young athlete. This was the quiet certainty of a man who had stared death in the face and emerged victorious. Miles away in the neon-lit chaos of Wild Card Boxing Gym, Brick Maddox's training session had drawn its usual crowd of spectators. The heavyweight champion moved through his combinations with savage intensity, each punch thrown with the devastating power that had made him the most feared knockout artist in the UFC. His sparring partners, all professional fighters themselves, struggled to keep pace. With his aggression, the 20-ounce gloves did little to diminish the bone-rattling impact of his strikes. Heavy bags split under his assault. Speed bags exploded from their chains. The gym's concrete walls seemed to vibrate with each thunderous blow. "Look at this power," his trainer called out to the gathering crowd. "This is what happens when natural talent meets modern training methods. This is what real fighting looks like in 2024. But as the evening wore on and the crowds dispersed, Detective Ray Castellano made his way up the winding road to Seagal's dojo. The veteran cop carried a manila folder thick with official documents and surveillance photographs, his weathered face etched with concern. "Steven," Castellano said as he entered the quiet sanctuary, "we need to talk about Vincent Torino." Seagal finished his kata with deliberate slowness before turning to face his old friend. "I assumed you would have investigated our host by now." Castellano spread the contents of his folder across a low table. Police reports, surveillance photos, and intelligence summaries painted a disturbing picture of Torino's underground empire. This guy isn't just a fight promoter. He's connected to human trafficking, money laundering, and organized crime up and down the West Coast. The photographs showed young women being moved through warehouse districts, shipping containers with false manifests, and meetings between Torino and known criminals. Bank records revealed suspicious transfers totaling millions of dollars through shell companies and offshore accounts. His fight promotions are a front, Castellano continued. The real money comes from moving people, specifically young women, across international borders. The underground fighting scene provides perfect cover for the operation. Seagal studied the documents with the analytical eye of someone who had spent years in law enforcement. "You believe tomorrow night's event is connected to this larger operation?" "I'm certain of it. Steven, this isn't just about some punk challenging you to a fight. You getting close to their operation at that charity event made them nervous. Several of the girls they traffic come from backgrounds similar to those hospital kids. Vulnerable, forgotten, easy to disappear." The implications hung heavy in the air between them. What had seemed like a simple matter of defending honor against arrogance was revealing itself as something far more sinister. "It's too late to back out now without looking like a coward," Seagal said quietly. "So what? Let them think you're afraid. Your reputation can survive that. But if you walk into Torino's warehouse tomorrow night, you might not walk out alive." Seagal's dark eyes reflected the flickering candlelight as he considered his friend's warning. But even as the danger became clear, his resolve only strengthened. Sometimes, he reflected, a man had to risk everything to stand for something that mattered. Saturday night arrived with the weight of inevitability. Torino's converted warehouse in downtown Los Angeles buzzed with an electric energy that only came before truly historic events. 400 people had packed into the industrial space, creating an atmosphere that was part boxing match, part Roman gladiator spectacle. The crowd was a fascinating mixture of Los Angeles society, celebrities who had grown up watching Seagal's films sat beside underground fight enthusiasts, while wealthy socialites rubbed shoulders with street fighters and gangsters. The makeshift ring, surrounded by concrete pillars and harsh industrial lighting, stood in the center like an altar of violence. Brick Maddox entered to thunderous applause that shook the warehouse walls. He moved with the predatory confidence of an apex predator, shadowboxing as he walked, his muscles rippling under the bright lights. His team followed behind him like an entourage of war chiefs, each member feeding off the champion's absolute certainty of victory. Ladies and gentlemen, Torino announced through a crackling sound system. Introducing the UFC heavyweight champion of the world, standing 6 feet 4 inches tall and weighing 245 pounds of pure destruction, Brick Maddox. The crowd erupted. Camera phones captured every angle as Maddox climbed into the ring, flexing and posturing for the audience that had come to witness what most believed would be a one-sided massacre. Then the warehouse fell silent. Steven Seagal entered without fanfare, walking quietly through the crowd in a traditional white aikido gi. His movements were fluid and economical, his expression serene but alert. Unlike Maddox's theatrical entrance, Seagal's arrival carried the understated authority of a man who had nothing left to prove to anyone. But his experienced eyes were working constantly, cataloging details that others missed. Several men in expensive suits stood near the exits, their positions too strategic to be coincidental. Their body language suggested military or law enforcement training, and their attention seemed focused on more than just the upcoming fight. And his opponent, Torino, continued, though his voice lacked the enthusiasm he'd shown for Maddox. The legendary action star and martial artist, Steven Seagal. The applause was respectful but subdued. Many in the crowd had come to witness a spectacle, and spectacles required victims. In their minds, Seagal was serving that role tonight. As the two fighters approached the center of the ring, the contrast was striking. Maddox bounced on his toes like a caged animal, his hands wrapped in professional fighting gloves, his face twisted with aggressive anticipation. Seagal stood perfectly still, his breathing controlled, his dark eyes studying his opponent with the patience of a master who had faced this type of challenge countless times before. "Any final words, Grandpa?" Maddox sneered, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Only that respect is earned," Seagal replied quietly. "And wisdom comes from understanding one's limitations. Let's see how wise you feel when you're unconscious." On the canvas, the informal referee, a former boxer named Tommy Martinez, gave them their instructions. "This is an exhibition match. No time limits, no rounds. Fight continues until one fighter is unable to continue or calls for a stop. Touch gloves and I don't touch gloves with has-beens," Maddox interrupted, turning back to his corner. Seagal remained in the center of the ring, his posture relaxed but ready. When Martinez signaled for the fight to begin, Maddox charged forward like a bull, throwing a massive right hook that carried all his weight and fury behind it. But the punch found only air. Seagal had moved with minimal effort, a simple sidestep that made Maddox's devastating blow pass harmlessly by his head. Before the champion could recover his balance, Seagal's hands found his extended arm. What happened next occurred too quickly for most spectators to follow. Using perfect Irimi Nage technique, Seagal redirected all of Maddox's forward momentum into a throwing motion that sent the champion crashing to the canvas with bone-jarring force. Exactly 45 seconds had elapsed on Tommy Martinez's stopwatch. Maddox lay unconscious on the canvas, his chest rising and falling slowly as medical personnel rushed into the ring. The warehouse had fallen into stunned silence, broken only by the sound of camera phones capturing the impossible moment when a 71-year-old martial artist had knocked out a prime heavyweight champion with what appeared to be a gentle redirection of energy. When Maddox finally regained consciousness 3 minutes later, Seagal was kneeling beside him, helping him sit up with genuine concern. "I was wrong about you, old man," Maddox said, his voice thick with confusion and newfound respect. "That wasn't movie magic. That was real." Seagal helped him to his feet as the crowd began to process what they had witnessed. "You have great strength and natural ability. With proper guidance, you could become truly formidable." But their moment of mutual respect was shattered by the sharp crack of gunfire echoing through the warehouse. The warehouse erupted into chaos as masked gunmen stormed through multiple entrances simultaneously. The celebration of Seagal's impossible victory transformed instantly into a nightmare of screaming spectators and echoing gunshots. Tables overturned as people dove for cover behind concrete pillars and industrial equipment. Muzzle flashes lit the industrial space like deadly strobe lights as automatic weapons chattered their lethal rhythm. The professional efficiency of the Attacks suggested military-trained operatives rather than common criminals. They moved with coordinated precision, covering each other's advances while systematically targeting specific individuals in the crowd. "Get down!" Detective Ray Castellano shouted as he pushed through the panicking crowd toward the ring. His cop instincts had kicked in the moment the shooting started, and his weathered face was grim with the realization that this wasn't random violence. Steven Seagal reacted with the fluid motion of someone who had faced gunfire before. He grabbed Maddox's arm and pulled the still disoriented fighter toward the nearest concrete pillar, their footsteps echoing against the warehouse walls as bullets sparked off metal beams around them. "What the hell is happening?" Maddox gasped, his head still clearing from the knockout. The champion who had entered the warehouse with supreme confidence now found himself in a life-or-death situation that no amount of octagon experience had prepared him for. "Someone wanted us both dead," Seagal replied, his voice calm despite the chaos surrounding them. His dark eyes were already analyzing the tactical situation, counting muzzle flashes and tracking the gunman's movements with the precision of his law enforcement background. Castellano reached their position just as a burst of automatic fire stitched across the concrete wall where his head had been moments before. Blood was already seeping through his shirt from multiple wounds, but the veteran detective's grip on his service weapon remained steady. "Steven," he gasped, sliding down the pillar as his strength failed him. "This wasn't random. They were waiting for both of you." "Red." Seagal caught his friend as he collapsed, immediately pressing his hands against the worst of the bleeding. His field medicine training from decades of law enforcement work kicked in automatically, but even he could see that Castellano's wounds were severe. Around them, the warehouse had become a war zone. 7 spectators lay motionless on the concrete floor, their evening of entertainment ending in tragedy. The gunmen were already beginning their retreat, having accomplished their primary objective of eliminating specific targets. "Listen to me," Castellano whispered, his voice growing weaker as shock set in. 6 months. Been investigating Torino. It's bigger than just fights. Human trafficking, international network." Seagal leaned closer, his friend's words barely audible above the continuing gunfire and screaming. "The charity event, you got too close. They saw you talking to those hospital kids, same demographic they target." "Stay with me," Ray Seagal said, though he could feel his friend's pulse growing weaker beneath his hands. "Trust no one in the department. Some are paid off." Castellano's eyes found Seagal's with desperate intensity. "They wanted you eliminated, both of you." This fight was supposed to end differently. Maddox, now fully alert despite his earlier knockout, had positioned himself to watch for approaching gunmen. The reality of their situation was sinking in. They hadn't just witnessed a random attack, they had been the primary targets. "The girls," Castellano continued, his voice fading. "Young women, disappeared from shelters, colleges, streets. Torino's operation moves them overseas. You asking questions at the charity made them nervous." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer as emergency responders raced toward the warehouse district. But Castellano's expression suggested that help might not be coming from the directions they expected. "Some federal agents, on there. Payroll too. Evidence, safety deposit box. Bank of America on Wilshire. Box 847. Key is in my desk drawer, second from bottom." His eyes rolled back as unconsciousness claimed him, his breathing becoming shallow and labored. Seagal checked his pulse, weak but present. Ray Castellano would live, but barely. The gunfire had stopped now, replaced by the distant sound of approaching sirens and the moans of wounded spectators. Seagal and Maddox found themselves crouched behind concrete pillars in a warehouse filled with the aftermath of violence, slowly realizing that what had begun as a simple challenge between fighters had exposed them to a conspiracy far larger and more dangerous than either had imagined. "We need to get out of here," Maddox said, his street instincts finally overriding his shock. "If those cops are dirty, we're sitting ducks." Seagal looked down at his unconscious friend, then at the champion who had challenged him just minutes before. The younger man was right. They had stumbled into something that would require all their skills to survive. "Welcome to the real fight," Seagal said quietly as they prepared to flee into the Los Angeles night, the harsh fluorescent lights of Cedars-Sinai Hospital's ICU waiting room cast everything in an unforgiving glare at 3 o'clock in the morning. Steven Seagal sat motionless in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his aikido gi replaced by dark street clothes that would draw less attention from curious nurses and security guards. Across from him, Brick Maddox slumped forward with his head in his hands, still processing the violent transformation of what should have been his moment of triumph. The UFC champion's expensive athletic wear was torn and bloodstained from their escape through the warehouse district's maze of industrial buildings and abandoned lots. Mr. Castellano is stable, Dr. Lisa Chun announced as she emerged from the ICU, her surgical scrubs still bearing traces of the detective's blood. 3 bullets to the chest, but we were able to remove them all. He lost a lot of blood, but he's going to survive. Both men exhaled relief they hadn't realized they'd been holding. Detective Castellano's survival meant their only link to understanding the night's events was still alive. Can we see him? Seagal asked quietly. He's sedated, but he's been asking. For you. 5 minutes only. His body needs rest to heal. The ICU was a maze of beeping machines and softly humming ventilators. Castellano looked small and fragile connected to the various monitors tracking his vital signs. His weathered face was pale against the white hospital pillows, but his eyes opened when Seagal approached his bedside. "Steven," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the medical equipment. "You made it out. We both did. Now tell me what you really know about Torino's operation." Castellano's eyes darted toward Maddox, uncertain whether the fighter could be trusted with sensitive information. But Seagal nodded, and the detective began speaking in careful, measured sentences between labored breaths. Started investigating 6 months ago. Missing persons reports. Young women disappearing from colleges, shelters, homeless encampments. Pattern wasn't random. They were targeting specific demographics. He paused to gather strength, each word requiring obvious effort. Torino's fight promotions are perfect. Cover. International contacts, cash transactions, warehouse facilities near shipping ports. But he's not the top of the food chain. Who is? Maddox asked, leaning closer to catch the detective's whispered words. Federal prosecutor named Miranda Blackwood. Uses her position to quash investigations, eliminate evidence, prosecute anyone who gets too close to the truth. She's got agents on her payroll, judges in her pocket, politicians taking her money. The implications hit both men like physical blows. They weren't just dealing with underground criminals. They were facing corruption that reached into the highest levels of law enforcement and government. At the charity event, Castellano continued, "You were talking to those hospital kids. Same vulnerable population Blackwood's network targets. Security cameras captured everything. They realized you might start asking questions, might notice patterns. So they arranged for us to kill each other," Seagal said, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. "The fight was supposed to end with at least one of you dead, maybe both. When that didn't happen, they went to Plan B. Eliminate all witnesses and make it look like gang violence." Dr. Chun appeared at the foot of the bed, tapping her watch meaningfully. Visiting time was over, but Castellano gripped Seagal's arm with surprising strength. "Evidence is in my safety deposit box. Bank of America on Wilshire, box 847. Keys in my desk at the station, second drawer from bottom. But Steven, trust nobody in the department. Some of my own colleagues are taking Blackwood's money." As they left the hospital, both men noticed the same expensive black sedans that had been at the warehouse now parked across the street, their occupants watching the ICU entrance with professional patience. The sun was just beginning to rise over the Hollywood Hills when Brick Maddox's silver Porsche pulled into the circular driveway of Steven Seagal's private dojo. The champion looked haggard and frightened, a stark contrast to the arrogant fighter who had challenged the Aikido master just days before. Seagal emerged from his morning meditation to find Maddox pacing nervously in the dojo's main training area, his usual swagger replaced by the jerky movements of a man running on adrenaline and fear. "They know where I live," Maddox said without preamble. "Black SUVs have been parked outside my house since dawn. My phone's been ringing nonstop, with numbers I don't recognize, and when I answer, nobody speaks, they just hang up." "You're being watched," Seagal confirmed, noting the way Maddox kept glancing toward the windows. "They want you to know it. Fear is a weapon they use to control people." Maddox collapsed into a chair, his massive frame somehow looking smaller than it had in the octagon. My manager Danny got jumped in his office last night. 3 guys in masks beat the hell out of him with baseball bats. Left him a message. Tell your boy to keep quiet about what he saw. The younger man's hands were shaking as he pulled out his phone to show Seagal the photos Danny had texted from his hospital bed. The veteran manager's face was swollen beyond recognition, his arms covered in defensive wounds from trying to protect himself. Danny's been with me since I turned pro, Maddox continued, his voice cracking slightly. He's like a father to me. And they hurt him just to send me a message. Seagal poured 2 cups of green tea from the ceramic pot that was always warming in his dojo. The ritual of preparation seemed to calm both men, providing a moment of peace. In the chaos their lives had become. There's something else, Maddox said, accepting the tea with grateful hands. My sister Jenny, she's been missing for 2 days. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Seagal's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his dark eyes. A recognition that the stakes had just escalated beyond anything they'd faced so far. Tell me about Jenny. She's 19, sophomore at UCLA studying criminal justice. Wants to be a prosecutor someday. Maddox's voice softened when he talked about his sister, revealing a protective love that contrasted sharply with his public persona. Our parents died in a car accident when I was 20. I've been raising her ever since. He pulled up photos. On his phone, a young woman with bright green eyes and her brother's determined jawline, but with softer features that suggested kindness rather than aggression. She called me 3 days ago, asking questions about some modeling agency that was recruiting on campus. Said something felt wrong about their approach. They were targeting girls from broken homes, girls with no family support systems. Seagal's tea grew cold in his hands as he listened to the familiar pattern emerging. What was the name of this agency? Elite West Coast Models. They had professional-looking materials, fancy offices in Beverly Hills, promises of international work for the right girls. But Jenny said their questions weren't about modeling. They wanted to know about family, financial situations, who would miss them if they disappeared. Did she report this to campus security? She tried. They told her it was probably legitimate. And she was being paranoid. Said modeling agencies always did extensive background checks. Maddox's fists clenched as he continued. Her roommate found her room ransacked yesterday morning. Jenny's laptop was gone, along with all her notes about the modeling agency. The connection to Torino's trafficking network was obvious, but Seagal didn't voice what they were both thinking. Jenny Maddox hadn't simply disappeared. She had been taken because she was asking the wrong questions about the right people. Campus security dismissed it as a voluntary absence. Maddox continued bitterly. Said college students go missing all the time. Usually turn up in a few days with hangovers and embarrassing stories. But you know better. I know my sister. Jenny doesn't drink, doesn't party, doesn't disappear without telling me where she's going. She calls me every day, even if it's just to complain about her professors or ask for money. Seagal stood and walked to the window overlooking Los Angeles, his mind already working through the implications. The warehouse shooting hadn't been the end of their problems. It had been the beginning. By exposing Torino's operation, they had painted targets on everyone they cared about. They took her to control you, he said finally. As long as they have Jenny, they know you won't go to the police or the media with what you saw last night. Then, we have to find her. Maddox's voice carried the desperation of a man who had just realized his arrogance had put his sister's life in danger. Steven, I need your help. I can't do this alone. Seagal turned back to face the younger man, seeing not the arrogant champion who had challenged him days before, but a frightened brother willing to do anything to save his sister. Finding her means going after people who have unlimited resources and government protection, Seagal warned. It means becoming fugitives ourselves. I don't care. Jenny's all the family I have left. The converted meat packing plant in East Los Angeles reeked of old blood and fresh violence. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting sickly shadows across concrete walls that had witnessed decades of brutality, both legal and otherwise. Tonight, it hosted an underground tournament that existed in the gray area between sport and savagery. Steven Seagal and Brick Maddox moved through the crowd like hunters studying their prey. Both men had traded their usual attire for the kind of anonymous street clothes that would help them blend into the underground fighting scene. Dark jeans, work boots, and leather jackets that had seen better days. "Remember," Seagal said quietly, as they approached the registration table, "we're here to gather intelligence, not to fight for sport. These tournaments are recruiting grounds for Torino's larger operation." The tournament organizer, a heavily tattooed man named Rico Valdez, looked up from his clipboard with the suspicious eyes of someone who had learned not to trust strangers. But when he recognized Maddox, his expression shifted to something approaching. "Reverence. Holy shit, you're Brick Maddox. What's the UFC champion doing in my little underground show?" Looking for real competition, Maddox replied, playing the role of the arrogant fighter seeking thrills outside the regulated world of professional MMA. "Getting tired of the politics and drug testing. Heard you guys don't ask too many questions here." Rico's laugh was harsh and knowing. "No questions, no drug tests, no medical exams. Just pure fighting. But I got to warn you, champ, these boys don't follow Queensberry rules. They fight to win by any means necessary." As they moved deeper into the facility, both men observed the systematic degradation of young fighters that Castellano had warned them about. Many of the competitors showed signs of drug use, dilated pupils, excessive aggression, and the kind of desperate hunger that came from chemical dependency. "They're not just hosting fights," Seagal murmured as they watched a match between two teenagers who couldn't have been older than 17. "They're creating addicts, people who'll do anything for their next fix." The fights themselves were brutal affairs that bore little resemblance to legitimate martial arts competition. Weapons were allowed, eye gouging was common, and matches continued long past the point where any reasonable referee would have stopped them. The crowd bet heavily on the violence, cheering loudest when blood was spilled. "Winner gets 500 cash," Rico announced before each match. "Loser gets medical bills and a lecture about finding a new hobby." But it was between the fights that the real business was conducted. Seagal and Maddox watched as well-dressed men approached fighters, who asked too many questions or seemed reluctant to participate in future events. Those conversations always ended the same way. The fighter would nod agreement, accept an envelope of cash, and disappear into the Los Angeles night. "Anyone who gets curious about the operation just vanishes," Maddox observed, watching another young fighter accept money from one of the mysterious benefactors. "And anyone who tries to leave the organization finds out there are worse things than losing fights," Seagal added, noting the scared faces of several competitors who seemed to be participating against their will. When Rico announced that Maddox would face Crusher Kowalski, a 300-pound behemoth with arms like tree trunks and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite with a dull knife, the crowd erupted in anticipation. But Seagal had insisted on being the one to fight. "I need to understand how they operate," he had explained earlier. "And I need them to see that traditional martial arts can be effective in their environment." The match began with Crusher charging forward like an enraged rhinoceros, his massive fists swinging with enough force to cave in a normal man's skull. But Seagal moved like smoke, redirecting the giant's momentum and using aikido principles adapted for lethal combat. Instead of the flowing, dance-like movements that spectators expected from traditional martial arts, Seagal's techniques were sharp and efficient. He targeted pressure points, disrupted balance, and used Crusher's own size against him. When the giant finally collapsed, unconscious but breathing, the crowd fell silent in amazement. "That's not possible," Rico muttered, staring at the fallen fighter. "Nobody drops Crusher without breaking their hands on his skull." But Seagal's victory had attracted exactly the kind of attention they'd hoped to avoid. As they prepared to leave, several men in expensive suits approached with the predatory smiles of sharks sensing blood in the water. "Mr. Seagal," the lead man said, his accent suggesting Eastern European origins, "my employer would very much like to meet with you. He has opportunities that might interest a man of your unique talents." The invitation wasn't really a request, and both Seagal and Maddox understood that their investigation had just become significantly more dangerous. The convoy of black SUVs wound through the industrial maze of San Pedro like a funeral procession, their tinted windows reflecting the harsh sodium lights of the Port District. Seagal and Maddox followed at a careful distance in a stolen motorcycle, using the vehicle's maneuverability to stay hidden among the labyrinth of shipping containers and cargo trucks. There, Maddox whispered, pointing toward a cluster of warehouses. Near the port's edge, they're stopping at that complex. The buildings looked legitimate from the outside. Clean concrete walls, proper signage, security lighting that suggested normal business operations. But Seagal's trained eye noticed details that revealed the facility's true purpose. Too many guards for a legitimate business, windows that had been bricked over from the inside, and shipping trucks arriving and departing at odd hours, they abandoned. The motorcycle several blocks away and approached on foot, using Seagal's military-style reconnaissance skills to remain invisible in the industrial landscape. The aikido master moved with the fluid silence of someone who had conducted countless surveillance operations during his law enforcement career. Motion sensors, he warned, pointing to nearly invisible devices mounted on the warehouse corners. And those guards aren't rent-a-cops. They're carrying military-grade weapons. Through telephoto surveillance equipment borrowed from one of Seagal's former students in private security, they documented a systematic operation that confirmed Castellano's worst fears. Young women were being moved through the complex in groups of 10 to 12, their faces showing the hollow despair of people who had given up hope. Jesus, Maddox breathed, watching through binoculars as another group was loaded into a container truck. How many girls are they moving? Dozens every week, based on the traffic patterns, Seagal replied, photographing license plates and shipping manifests with a camera equipped with a powerful zoom lens. This is just one facility. There are probably others throughout the city. The operation was chillingly efficient. The women were processed through the warehouse like cargo, tagged with identification numbers, and sorted according to criteria that neither man wanted to contemplate. Guards wearing tactical gear and carrying assault rifles supervised every aspect of the operation. Container trucks leave every Tuesday and Thursday, Seagal noted, studying the shipping schedules through his scope. The manifests say electronics and textiles, but the weight distribution is wrong for those types of cargo. Where are they going? According to these shipping labels, various ports in Asia and Eastern Europe, places where young American women would bring premium prices on. The international market. As they watched, a new shipment arrived, 12 young women in zip-tie restraints, their eyes vacant with whatever drugs had been used to keep them compliant. Among them, Maddox recognized a face that made his blood run cold. That's Rebecca Martinez, he said, his voice tight with recognition. She goes to UCLA with Jenny. They're in the same criminal justice program. The connection was obvious and terrifying. The trafficking network wasn't just grabbing random victims. They were specifically targeting young women who might become prosecutors, police officers, or other law enforcement professionals. They were eliminating potential future threats before they could develop. If Rebecca's here, then Jenny might be too, Maddox said, preparing to move toward the warehouse. Wait. Seagal's hand on his arm was firm but gentle. This facility is too well defended for a direct assault. We need to gather more intelligence before we act. Through the stolen camera equipment, they continued documenting the operation as night fell over the port district. The scope of the conspiracy became clear as they photographed meetings between warehouse supervisors and men in expensive suits who carried themselves with the authority of government officials. Federal agents, Seagal identified, recognizing the distinctive bearing of law enforcement officers. But they're not here to shut down the operation. They're here to protect it. The most damning evidence came when they photographed a woman in a perfectly tailored business suit reviewing shipping manifests with obvious authority over the entire operation. Her steel-gray hair and cold demeanor suggested someone accustomed to wielding power without question. That's Miranda Blackwood, Maddox said, recognizing the federal prosecutor from news coverage of high-profile cases. What's a federal prosecutor doing at a human trafficking operation? Running it, Seagal replied grimly, snapping photos as Blackwood personally inspected the latest group of victims. Castellano was right. The corruption goes all the way to the top. As they prepared to withdraw with their evidence, Maddox spotted something that changed everything. Jenny's UCLA student ID card lying in the trash outside the warehouse entrance, partially hidden under shipping documents and fast food wrappers. She was here, he said, holding up the identification with shaking hands. Jenny was in that warehouse. But the card also meant something else that neither man wanted to acknowledge. If Ginny had been processed through this facility, she was already aboard a container ship headed for a destination where American law enforcement would never find her. The weight of that realization settled over both men like a burial shroud as they retreated into the Los Angeles night, carrying evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and the terrible knowledge that they might already be too late to save the innocent young woman whose only crime had been asking the right questions about the wrong people. The abandoned factory complex north of downtown Los Angeles had become a fortress of shadows and concrete. Seagal and Maddox approached through the maze of rusted machinery and broken windows, moving with the careful precision of soldiers entering enemy territory. Intelligence gathered from their port surveillance had led them here, another facility in Torino's network where the most problematic victims were held before final disposition. Thermal imaging shows 12 heat signatures in the main building, Seagal whispered, studying readings from military-grade equipment borrowed from his former law enforcement contacts. 6 guards, 6 prisoners. The layout suggests they're keeping the women in the basement level. Maddox checked his borrowed tactical vest and the weapons they'd acquired through Seagal's underground network of former cops and military personnel who operated outside official channels. How do we get past those motion sensors without triggering every alarm in the place? We don't avoid them, Seagal replied, his dark eyes studying the building's architecture with tactical precision. We use them to our advantage. When multiple sensors trigger simultaneously, it usually indicates equipment malfunction rather than intrusion. Their plan relied on timing and misdirection, create enough simultaneous alerts to overwhelm the security system while providing cover for their actual entry point. But as they prepared to breach the facility, armed figures emerged from concealment positions they hadn't detected. Klaus Brenner stepped into the pale moonlight like a predator revealing himself to prey. The German ex-Special Forces operative was everything Seagal had expected from Castellano's intelligence files. 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle, pale blue eyes that missed nothing, and the efficient movements of someone trained to kill with maximum efficiency. Mr. Seagal, Brenner said in accented English, his voice carrying the confidence of a man who had never lost a fight, and the famous UFC champion. You've been causing considerable trouble for my employer's business operations. 5 mercenaries flanked him, each carrying automatic weapons and moving with the coordinated precision of elite military units. Their equipment and tactics suggested extensive combat experience in actual war zones rather than the controlled environment of professional fighting. Your investigation ends here, Brenner continued, drawing a tactical knife with practiced ease. But first, you're going to answer some questions about what you've learned and who you've shared it with. The only thing I've learned, Seagal replied, calmly, is that you work for people who prey on innocent children. Brenner's laugh was cold and professional. Spare me the moral lecture, old man. This is business, nothing more. Supply and demand, market forces, profit margins. You movie stars always think everything is about good and evil. The first mercenary moved forward with his weapon raised, but Seagal was already in motion. Decades of aikido training had taught him to read intentions in an opponent's posture, and he saw the attack coming before it fully developed. His response was swift and decisive, a disarming technique that sent the assault rifle spinning through the air while the mercenary collapsed with a dislocated shoulder. Impressive, Brenner acknowledged, but theatrical martial arts won't help you against modern military training. What followed was a running battle through the industrial complex that tested every skill both men had developed. Brenner's combat techniques were brutal and efficient, military combatives designed to end fights quickly and permanently. But Seagal's aikido had been forged in real combat situations, adapted over decades of facing life-or-death encounters. Maddox found himself learning the difference between sport fighting and actual warfare as bullets sparked off concrete around them. His MMA skills, enhanced by Seagal's teachings about environmental awareness and weapon improvisation, allowed him to contribute to the fight despite being outgunned. Your traditional martial arts are obsolete, Brenner taunted as he pressed his attack with military precision. The modern world requires modern solutions. But Seagal's response demonstrated why ancient principles had survived for centuries. Using Aikido's core concept of redirecting force rather than meeting it directly, he turned Brenner's aggression against him, creating openings that allowed traditional techniques to penetrate modern defenses. The battle raged through multiple levels of the factory, each environment presenting new challenges and opportunities. Seagal's understanding of combat psychology and tactical positioning proved as valuable as his physical techniques, while Maddox's athletic ability and power provided crucial support. When Brenner finally fell, unconscious from a perfectly executed Aikido throw that used his own momentum to drive him into a concrete support beam, the remaining mercenaries lost their coordination and confidence. Without their leader's tactical guidance, they became individual fighters rather than a coordinated unit. Dawn was breaking over the Hollywood Hills as Seagal's stolen van wound through the narrow mountain roads toward a safe house that existed off all official records. The rescue mission at Torino's compound had succeeded beyond their most optimistic hopes, but the cost had been higher than either man wanted to acknowledge. In the back of the van, 16 young women huddled together, under emergency blankets, their faces showing the hollow trauma of people who had survived something no human being should endure. Among them was Jenny Maddox, barely recognizable after days of captivity that had left her physically and emotionally shattered. "Jenny," Maddox whispered, cradling his sister as she drifted in and out of consciousness. "You're safe now. I've got you." But even as he spoke the words, blood was seeping through the makeshift bandage covering the bullet wound in his left shoulder. He had taken the shot while shielding Jenny from gunfire during their escape, and despite Seagal's field medicine, the bleeding hadn't completely stopped. "Stay with me, Brick," Seagal said, monitoring his partner's vital signs while navigating the winding road. "The wound isn't fatal, but you need proper medical attention." The safe house was a remote cabin owned by Marcus Chun, one of Seagal's former students who had built a successful private security company on the principles he'd learned during Aikido training. The location was perfect, isolated enough to avoid detection, but equipped with the medical supplies and communication equipment they would need. "Jesus Christ," Marcus said as he helped carry the rescued women into the cabin's main room. "How many more facilities are there?" "Too many," Seagal replied grimly, helping to establish a triage area for the victims who needed immediate medical attention. This operation spans multiple states, possibly multiple countries. As Jenny regained consciousness in the cabin's makeshift medical bay, the true scope of the conspiracy began to emerge through her fragmented but crucial testimony. The criminal justice student had used her academic training to observe and document details that other victims might have missed. "The woman in the expensive suits," Jenny said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She came to the compound personally. Miranda Blackwood. She was reviewing which of us would be problematic if we ever escaped." Maddox gripped his sister's hand, rage and relief warring in his expression. "What did she say?" "That some victims could be allowed to survive because no one would believe their stories. But others, girls studying law enforcement, criminal justice, anyone who might become a prosecutor or police officer, they had to be eliminated or shipped overseas where they could never testify." The revelation confirmed their worst fears about the operation's sophistication. This wasn't random human trafficking. It was a systematic effort to eliminate potential future threats to the criminal network while generating massive profits from the sale of innocent lives. "She had files on all of us," Jenny continued, her academic training allowing her to provide details that other victims might not have noticed. "Background checks, family connections, career plans. They knew exactly who we were before they took us." "How many others?" Seagal asked gently, understanding that information was crucial to preventing future victims. "Dozens, maybe hundreds. The compound was just one facility. They talked about operations in Chicago, Miami, Seattle. Girls were being moved constantly, like inventory in a warehouse. As medical supplies were distributed and the rescued women began receiving proper care, the weight of their discovery settled over Seagal and Maddox like a burial shroud. They had saved 16 lives, but dozens more remained in the pipeline of an organization with unlimited resources and government protection. "There's something else," Jenny said, struggling to sit up despite her injuries. "Blackwood was angry about the warehouse shooting. She said it was supposed to eliminate both of you." but instead it just made you more dangerous to their operation. What do you mean? Maddox asked. She ordered the attack on the compound because you were getting too close to the truth. But she also said this was just the beginning, that she had resources you couldn't imagine, and she was going to destroy everyone who had helped you. The implications were clear and terrifying. Their rescue mission had been successful, but it had also escalated the conflict to a level where Miranda Blackwood would stop at nothing to eliminate all witnesses and evidence of her crimes. If summoned by Jenny's warning, Marcus Chin's secure phone rang with an emergency alert. Federal marshals were already surrounding the safe house, their vehicles moving into position with the precision of a military operation. They found us, Seagal said, watching through reinforced windows as government vehicles established a perimeter around the cabin. Blackwood's moving faster than we anticipated. The federal vehicles surrounding Marcus Chin's safe house weren't conducting a standard law enforcement operation. They were implementing a systematic elimination protocol designed to leave no witnesses alive. Through the cabin's reinforced windows, Seagal and Maddox watched as agents in tactical gear established kill zones rather than arrest positions. These aren't legitimate federal marshals, Seagal observed, noting the subtle differences in equipment and procedure that his law enforcement background allowed him to detect. They're private contractors operating under federal authority. Jenny Maddox had found the strength to sit up, her criminal justice training allowing her to provide crucial intelligence despite her physical condition. At the compound, I overheard Blackwood talking to someone on the phone about cleaning up loose ends and ensuring operational security. What exactly did she say? Maddox asked, helping his sister drink water while keeping one eye on the federal perimeter forming outside. That the warehouse shooting was supposed to eliminate both of you permanently, but instead you'd become bigger threats to the operation. She said she had contingency plans that would discredit any evidence you'd gathered while eliminating all witnesses simultaneously. The truth hit both men like physical blows. This wasn't just about silencing them. Blackwood was implementing a scorched earth strategy that would destroy everyone who had helped them while framing them for the very crimes they'd been investigating. Marcus Chun emerged from his communications center with updates from his private security network that confirmed their worst fears. Federal warrants have been issued for both of you on charges of murder, kidnapping, and operating a vigilante organization. Blackwood's claiming you kidnapped these women for your own trafficking operation. That's impossible, Maddox protested. We rescued them. We have evidence of the real operation. Evidence that's been dismissed as fabricated, Marcus continued grimly. Blackwood's people have constructed an elaborate false narrative that portrays you as dangerous criminals who manipulated a heroic federal prosecutor trying to stop human trafficking. Through encrypted communications with honest law enforcement contacts, they learned the full scope of Blackwood's counter-operation. Detective Castellano had been suspended from LAPD for collaboration with fugitives. The rescued women were being portrayed as kidnapping victims rather than trafficking survivors. Every piece of evidence they'd gathered was being systematically discredited. The media's buying the story completely, Marcus reported, monitoring news coverage on multiple screens. They're calling you domestic terrorists who used martial arts training to build a criminal organization. The cabin's secure communication system crackled with an incoming transmission from Agent Sarah Mitchell, one of the few federal officers they'd identified as genuinely honest. Her voice carried the urgency of someone operating outside official channels at considerable personal risk. Stephen, Brick, if you can hear this, you need to know that Blackwood's issued orders to eliminate all witnesses to her operation. The women you rescued are being transferred to federal custody, where they'll be suicided or have accidents before they can testify. The transmission continued with devastating news. She's also identified everyone who helped you. Marcus Chin's company is being raided as we speak. Detective Castellano is being transferred to a federal facility where he'll be vulnerable to elimination. Anyone connected to your investigation is being systematically targeted. As if to emphasize the point, explosions erupted around the cabin's perimeter as federal agents launched flashbang grenades in preparation for their final assault. But these weren't arrest tactics. They were elimination protocols designed to ensure no one survived to contradict Blackwood's narrative. The tunnel system, Marcus said, leading them toward a concealed entrance to an underground escape route he'd built during his most paranoid phase. It leads to a garage 2 miles from here with clean vehicles and supplies. As they prepared to evacuate the rescued women through the escape tunnel, Jenny Maddox provided one final piece of intelligence that changed everything. At the compound, Blackwood received a call from someone she called Your Honor. She was reporting that the operation would be concluded within 48 hours and all evidence eliminated. A federal judge, Seagal realized. She's not just running the trafficking operation. She's part of a conspiracy that includes judges, federal agents, and probably politicians. The scope of the corruption was staggering, reaching into every level of the justice system that was supposed to protect innocent people. As they escaped through Marcus Chin's tunnel system, carrying 16 traumatized women toward an uncertain future, both men understood that they were no longer fighting just criminals. They were battling the very institutions that were supposed to represent justice in America. Behind them, the safe house erupted in flames as federal agents implemented Blackwood's final solution, ensuring that any evidence of the real trafficking operation would be lost forever while creating a crime scene that supported their false narrative of domestic terrorism. The warehouse district of downtown Los Angeles had become a maze of federal roadblocks and surveillance operations as Miranda Blackwood implemented the final phase of her elimination strategy. From her command center in a requisitioned federal building, she coordinated resources that most legitimate law enforcement agencies could only dream of accessing. Status report, she demanded, her steel gray hair perfectly styled despite the early morning hour. Her cold blue eyes studied multiple computer screens showing real-time tracking of every known associate of Steven Seagal and Brick Maddox. Safe house has been neutralized, reported Agent David Kowalski, one of the federal officers who had been accepting Blackwood's payments for 3 years. All evidence of the rescue operation has been destroyed, and we've recovered security footage that supports our narrative of a kidnapping operation. But even as Blackwood savored what should have been her moment of total victory, encrypted communications intercepted by her technical team revealed that the primary targets had escaped, with all 16 rescued women. Worse yet, they had documented evidence of her personal involvement in the trafficking operation. How did they get past a federal perimeter? She demanded, her composed facade cracking slightly. Unknown. The cabin's owner, Marcus Chun, had constructed extensive underground escape routes that weren't detected by our surveillance. Chun himself is in custody, but he's not providing any information about their destination. Blackwood's mind worked through the implications with the calculating precision that had made her one of the most feared prosecutors in the federal system. Every day that Seagal and Maddox remained free increased the risk that their evidence would reach honest law enforcement officials or media outlets she couldn't control. Implement Protocol 7, she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions without hesitation. Protocol 7 was her most extreme contingency plan, a systematic elimination of all potential witnesses combined with a media campaign that would destroy the credibility of anyone who survived to testify. It required resources and authority that pushed the boundaries of even her considerable power, but the alternative was exposure and life in federal prison. Within hours, her coordinated assault on the truth began. Detective Ray Castellano was transferred from Cedars-Sinai Hospital to a federal medical facility where access could be strictly controlled. The transfer was justified as protective custody for a key witness in a domestic terrorism investigation. The 16 rescued women were processed through federal custody as kidnapping victims suffering from Stockholm Syndrome. Their testimonies about human trafficking were dismissed as false memories implanted by their captors through psychological manipulation. Several were transferred to psychiatric facilities where they could be kept sedated and isolated. Meanwhile, Blackwood's media operation painted Seagal and Maddox as dangerous vigilantes who had used their martial arts and fighting skills to build a criminal organization. The charity Gala confrontation was reframed as the beginning of a recruitment strategy targeting vulnerable women and children. The evidence is overwhelming, Blackwood announced during a press conference carried live on major networks. These men used their celebrity status and fighting abilities to lure young women into a sophisticated kidnapping and trafficking operation. They convinced victims that they were being rescued while actually moving them to different facilities. The narrative was believable because it contained elements of truth twisted into lies. The underground fighting tournaments became recruitment centers for criminal activity. The rescue operations became territorial disputes between competing trafficking organizations. Every piece of legitimate evidence was recontextualized to support the false story. But Blackwood's most devastating weapon was the manufactured evidence that her technical teams had created. Security footage from legitimate sources was edited to show Seagal and Maddox apparently coordinating criminal activities. Financial records were altered to suggest they had received payments from international trafficking organizations. Federal agents raided multiple facilities operated by this organization, she continued, displaying photographs of the actual trafficking locations that had been hastily converted to look like legitimate businesses. We recovered extensive evidence of their criminal enterprise, including detailed records of victims and financial transactions. The press conference concluded with Blackwood's most audacious lie. I want to assure the families of the victims that the federal government will use every resource at our disposal to bring these dangerous criminals to justice. We will not rest until Steven Seagal and Brick Maddox face the full consequences of their crimes against innocent young women. As media outlets broadcast her statements around the world, Blackwood felt the satisfaction of someone who had successfully weaponized the very justice system she was supposed to serve. Every honest law enforcement official who might have helped Seagal and Maddox now believed they were hunting dangerous criminals rather than investigating corruption. But even as she savored her apparent victory, encrypted communications from her surveillance teams brought disturbing news. Despite the federal manhunt and media campaign, the primary targets remained at large with evidence that could still destroy her carefully constructed empire. The hunt for Steven Seagal and Brick Maddox had become a race against time, with the full resources of the federal government deployed to silence two men who had learned too much about corruption at the highest levels of American law enforcement. 1 week into their fugitive existence, Seagal and Maddox had become ghosts haunting the underground networks of Los Angeles. They moved through abandoned warehouses and forgotten tunnels, surviving on cash and connections from Seagal's most trusted former students who operated outside official channels. The stress was showing on both men. Maddox's shoulder wound hadn't healed properly. An infection was setting in despite their limited medical supplies. Seagal felt every one of his 71 years as they constantly moved to stay ahead of federal manhunts. Every safe house we've used is compromised within hours, Maddox observed, checking his bandages while Seagal studied surveillance reports from their few remaining allies. But they weren't just running anymore. They were systematically dismantling Torino's network using the very underground connections that law enforcement couldn't penetrate. 3 satellite operations had been hit in the past week, 23 more victims freed, and crucial evidence gathered about Blackwood's international connections. We're fighting a war of attrition, Seagal replied, cleaning his weapons with methodical precision. Every operation we shut down costs them money and exposes more of their network. The rescued women were being moved through an underground railroad of honest civilians, former trafficking survivors, reformed criminals, and religious organizations that operated outside government oversight. Each successful rescue operation drew more heat from corrupt federal agents, but also attracted support from unexpected sources. Their latest intelligence came from Maria Santos, a trafficking survivor who had escaped Blackwood's network 2 years earlier. She provided locations of 3 more facilities and warned them about a massive shipment scheduled for the following night. 40 women, she said, her voice shaking with remembered trauma. Young college students, just like your sister. They're being moved to a ship at Long Beach port tomorrow. Once they're on that vessel, they'll disappear forever. As sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer to their current hideout, both men understood that their time was running out. Every successful operation made them more valuable targets, but also brought them closer to the truth about Blackwood's empire. We can't save them all, Seagal said quietly, but we can make sure their sacrifices weren't meaningless. The abandoned dojo in East Los Angeles had become their temporary sanctuary, its broken windows and graffitied walls hiding the most unlikely martial arts training in the city's history. While federal agents scoured legitimate locations, Seagal and Maddox found refuge in the forgotten places where honest law enforcement rarely ventured. Balance. Seagal instructed as Maddox attempted a basic aikido throw. In the octagon, you rely on strength and speed. In real combat, you must use your opponent's energy against them. The lessons weren't just physical, they were philosophical. Revelations that transformed Maddox's understanding of combat and life itself. Each technique demonstrated principles that applied beyond fighting. Patience over aggression, wisdom over strength, purpose over pride. I spent my whole career trying to dominate opponents, Maddox admitted, working through movements that felt foreign after years of brutal MMA training. You're teaching me to redirect their power instead of meeting it head-on. While they trained, Jenny worked with Detective Castellano through encrypted communications, coordinating with Agent Sarah Mitchell's network of honest federal officers who were conducting their own investigation into Blackwood's corruption. The evidence they gathered painted a picture of systematic criminal activity reaching into the highest levels of government. Blackwood's been using her position to eliminate investigations for over 5 years, Castellano reported through their secure channel. Bank records show payments from shell companies connected to international trafficking organizations. Their training was interrupted by news that transformed grief into focused determination. Jenny had been found dead in federal custody, officially ruled a suicide but bearing clear signs of murder. The young woman who had risked everything to expose the trafficking network had become its latest victim. They killed her to silence her testimony, Maddox said, his voice hollow with loss and rage. My little sister died because she asked the right questions about the wrong people. Seagal placed a steadying hand on his student's shoulder, feeling the younger man's transformation from selfish fighter to purposeful protector. Her death gives us clarity. We're no longer fighting for personal honor. We're seeking justice. For innocent victims. The integration of Aikido principles with MMA techniques created a fighting style that neither man had experienced before. Maddox's power, tempered by wisdom and directed by purpose, became far more dangerous than his previous reliance on brute force, as they prepared for their next operation. Both men understood that Jenny's murder had changed the nature of their conflict. This was no longer about exposing corruption. It had become a war for the soul of justice itself. The underground support network that had emerged around Seagal and Maddox defied every law enforcement prediction about criminal organizations. Instead of the typical hierarchy based on fear and profit, their operation attracted people motivated by justice and redemption. Marcus Williams, the former UFC champion who had initially mocked Seagal's Aikido, now provided safe houses and resources, while training other fighters in the philosophical principles that transformed combat from violence into protection. I spent 15 years hurting people for entertainment, he explained to a gathering of reformed fighters. These guys taught me how to use the same skills to save lives. Tony Rodriguez, another former champion, coordinated communications between their scattered cells using encrypted networks that his technology background made possible. Miguel Santos, the renowned trainer, provided medical supplies and tactical equipment through connections in the private security industry. The most unexpected support came from former trafficking victims who risked their lives to provide intelligence about Blackwood's operations. These women understood better than anyone the stakes involved in stopping the systematic exploitation that had destroyed countless lives. Every woman we save represents hundreds more who might be spared, explained Sarah Chun, a trafficking survivor who had become their primary intelligence coordinator. This isn't about revenge, it's about prevention. Agent Sarah Mitchell's network of honest federal officers had grown to include prosecutors, judges, and law enforcement officials who were conducting their own investigation into government corruption. But their progress was hampered by Blackwood's ability to intercept communications and eliminate witnesses. She's got sources inside every major law enforcement agency, Mitchell reported through encrypted channels. Every move we make is anticipated and countered before we can act. The support network's most valuable asset was its distributed structure. Unlike traditional criminal organizations with central leadership that could be eliminated, their operation consisted of independent cells united by shared principles rather than hierarchical control. But even as their network expanded, federal pressure intensified. Raids on supporters' homes and businesses increased weekly. Anyone connected to their operation faced harassment, arrest, or worse. Several former students who had provided shelter were found dead in apparent accidents. Blackwood's targeting everyone who's helped us, Maddox observed, reviewing intelligence reports about their supporters' fates. She's trying to isolate us by making it too dangerous for anyone to provide assistance. Yet for every supporter who was eliminated or intimidated into silence, two more emerged. The moral clarity of their cause attracted people who understood that some fights were worth any personal cost. Their growing network proved that corruption, no matter how sophisticated, ultimately depended on good people's willingness to look the other way. When enough individuals chose to act despite personal risk, even systemic evil became vulnerable. The trap was perfectly constructed, using every advantage that federal authority and unlimited resources could provide. Miranda Blackwood had spent weeks positioning her pieces, and tonight at the port of Long Beach, she would finally eliminate the two men who threatened everything she had built. Intelligence suggests they'll attempt to intercept the container shipment. Agent Kowalski reported from the command center overlooking the port facility. We have over 50 agents in position, plus mercenary support teams with military-grade equipment. But Blackwood's plan went beyond simple elimination. The operation was designed to create evidence supporting her narrative while silencing all witnesses permanently. Hidden cameras would record the terrorists attacking legitimate federal operations. The aftermath would justify even more aggressive measures against anyone who questioned official authority. When the shooting starts, she instructed her corrupt agents, ensure that no one survives to contradict our version of events. These men are too dangerous to be taken alive. The port facility had been transformed into a killing ground with multiple overlapping fields of fire, escape routes blocked, and innocent dock workers evacuated to prevent civilian casualties that might complicate the official story. Every detail had been planned with the precision of a military operation. Seagal and Maddox approached the trap with full knowledge of what awaited them. Agent Mitchell's intelligence network had provided detailed warnings about the federal ambush, but they also knew that 40 innocent women would disappear forever if they didn't act tonight. "We're walking into certain death," Maddox observed as they studied the port facility through binoculars from their concealed position. "Sometimes," Seagal replied quietly. "Honor requires accepting impossible odds for the sake of protecting innocence." The phone in Blackwood's hand buzzed with a secured text message that made her smile for the first time in weeks. Targets confirmed approaching from the east. All units report ready. But as her trap prepared to spring, Seagal's environmental awareness detected subtle inconsistencies in the federal positioning that suggested their approach had been anticipated. Years of law enforcement experience had taught him to recognize when surveillance operations had become elimination protocols. "They're not planning to arrest us," he told Maddox. "This is an execution disguised as law enforcement." The realization that they were facing corrupt federal agents rather than legitimate law enforcement changed their tactical approach completely. Rules of engagement that applied to honest cops became irrelevant when dealing with criminals wearing government badges. They prepared to enter what both men knew might be their final battle. Their tactical planning reflected everything they had learned about combining traditional martial arts wisdom with modern combat realities. Tonight would test whether centuries-old principles could triumph over contemporary corruption. The container ship's horn echoed across the harbor as the final pieces of Blackwood's trap moved into position, and two men who had started as enemies prepared to face impossible odds for the sake of justice. The ambush at Long Beach port unraveled with stunning swiftness when Seagal's tactical awareness and Maddox's enhanced combat skills turned Blackwood's carefully planned execution into a devastating counterattack. Years of law enforcement experience had taught Seagal to read the subtle signs that distinguished legitimate arrests from elimination operations. Motion sensors triggered simultaneously. He whispered to Maddox as they moved through the container. "Maze. Classic misdirection. They're expecting us to avoid detection, so we'll overwhelm their system instead." The corrupt federal agents found themselves facing opponents who understood their tactics better than they understood aikido principles or enhanced MMA techniques. Seagal's ability to redirect force and use environmental advantages neutralized their numerical superiority. while Maddox's combination of power and newfound wisdom made him devastatingly effective in close combat. But their greatest weapon was the intelligence network Agent Mitchell had developed. Honest federal officers coordinated with Detective Castellano to document everything through hidden surveillance equipment, ensuring that the truth about Blackwood's operation would survive regardless of the night's outcome. During the chaos, they captured several corrupt agents alive and recovered Blackwood's personal cell phone containing encrypted communications that proved her direct involvement in human trafficking, murder, and systematic corruption. "We have everything we need," Seagal said as sirens announced the arrival of legitimate law enforcement. "The evidence is irrefutable." However, Blackwood escaped in the confusion, and both men knew she would make one final, desperate attempt to eliminate all witnesses before her network completely collapsed. Miranda Blackwood's final gambit unfolded with the desperate fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. The federal safe house at the Beverly Hills Hotel, the same venue where everything had begun, now held the 16 rescued trafficking victims under protective custody while they prepared to testify against her operation. 6 international assassins, Agent Mitchell reported through encrypted communications. Former special forces from 3 different countries. Blackwood's paying them enough to disappear forever after eliminating all witnesses. The assassins moved through the hotel with professional efficiency, their assault coordinated to maximize casualties while minimizing their own exposure. They had studied the building's layout, identified escape routes, and planned contingencies for every possible law enforcement response. But they hadn't planned for Steven Seagal and Brick Maddox. The battle raged through multiple floors of the luxury hotel, from the basement parking garage to the rooftop gardens. Each environment presented unique challenges that tested every skill both men had developed during their unlikely partnership. Seagal's aikido principles proved devastatingly effective in the hotel's confined spaces, where traditional techniques could be adapted for lethal encounters. Maddox's integration of MMA power with philosophical wisdom created a fighting style that neither sport competition nor military training had prepared the assassins to face. Their coordination was perfect, master and student fighting as one unified force, each man's strengths compensating for the other's limitations. The assassins found themselves facing opponents who combined decades of experience with revolutionary fighting techniques. When the last assassin fell, the ballroom where their story had begun was finally silent except for the sound of approaching sirens carrying legitimate law enforcement to secure the evidence that would destroy Blackwood's empire forever. The climactic confrontation between Steven Seagal, Brick Maddox, and Miranda Blackwood unfolded in the same Beverly Hills hotel ballroom, where their story had begun. Blackwood, cornered and facing life in federal prison, had transformed from composed prosecutor into a desperate criminal willing to destroy everything rather than accept defeat. "You have no idea what you've destroyed," she snarled, her steel gray hair disheveled and her cold blue eyes reflecting the madness of someone whose carefully constructed world was collapsing. The military-grade assault rifle in her hands was her final argument against justice. But Blackwood's desperation had led her to rig the building with explosives, a final solution that would eliminate all evidence and witnesses while allowing her to escape in the chaos. Her finger hovered over the detonator as she delivered her ultimatum. "Everyone dies tonight, or I walk away untouched. Those are your choices." Seagal's response demonstrated the ultimate aikido principle, using an opponent's destructive energy to create positive outcomes. Through patient dialogue and psychological pressure, he guided Blackwood into revealing additional co-conspirators while Maddox quietly located and disarmed the explosive devices using skills learned during their fugitive period. "Your corruption ends here," Seagal said as federal agents surrounded the ballroom. "Justice doesn't require revenge, it requires truth." Blackwood's surrender came not through violence, but through the realization that her own actions had made escape impossible. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Her network had collapsed, and her final gambit had failed completely. The woman who had weaponized the justice system against innocent victims now faced that same system's full power directed against her crimes. 6 months later, the Beverly Hills Hotel ballroom sparkled once again with the warm light of the Champions for Children charity gala. The trafficking network had been completely dismantled, with 47 victims rescued and dozens of criminals prosecuted. Miranda Blackwood faced life in federal prison without possibility of parole. Detective Castellano, fully recovered and decorated with the Medal of Valor, watched proudly as Brick Maddox took the stage. The former arrogant champion had transformed into a humble student, his expensive suit replaced by a simple aikido gi. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maddox said, his voice carrying newfound wisdom and respect, "I want to introduce my sensei, a man who taught me that true strength comes not from dominating others, but from protecting those who cannot protect themselves." Steven Seagal stepped forward to thunderous applause, his serene smile reflecting the satisfaction of a master who had found renewed purpose. Children from St. Mary's Hospital gathered around as he began demonstrating basic self-defense techniques. With Maddox assisting as a respectful student, the final image was of master and student bowing to each other with mutual respect, while children applauded the demonstration of honor defeating pride, wisdom conquering arrogance, and justice triumphing over corruption through the transformation of the human heart. If you like the story, please watch another story on our channel and subscribe to the channel.